Hello, my name is Darius Baxter, and I'm proud to be joining you today from the halls of the U.S. Congress. I'm here today not to share a message of joy, but because we have a crisis in this country. I was born here in Washington, D.C. in 1993 to my mother and my father, both public servants. My mother, a D.C. public school teacher, and my father, a Metropolitan Police Department officer, did their best to ensure that I was hidden from the scourge that was happening around me. Like many Washingtonians in the 90s, I found myself growing up in a world surrounded by gun violence, where at a time we were known as the murder capital, not just here in the U.S., but around the world. But through their hard work and dedication, I found myself in a position where I always had access to amazing education and opportunities. But unfortunately, despite their best efforts, when I was 9 years old, I witnessed the violent murder of my father in my childhood home. At that point in my life, I had a decision to make, whether I was going to stay on the path that my parents had worked so hard to put me on, or if I was going to turn to the streets that surrounded me. Through the love, the care, and the kindness of my mother, Stephanie Paige Baxter, who I have the honor of standing in the shadow of, I stayed on that right path. And I continued to push and dedicate myself to a better self and a better community. That led me on a journey to remain here in Washington, D.C., to attend the prestigious Georgetown University. And it was there, at 17 years old, I began the path that led me here today. While I was at Georgetown, I found out very quickly that the world was much different than the one that I had grown up in 90s Washington, D.C. The bubble that I had lived in, thinking the world was this peaceful place filled with love, quickly popped as I realized the separation between the haves and the have-nots right here in my own city in Washington, D.C. In going through my own journey, as I matriculated to the graduation stage, I made a commitment to say that the story of a Darius Baxter, a young kid that experienced violence of a parent, that experienced homelessness, that experienced death and despair at a very young age, only to make it to a top 10 university to pursue his dreams, would not be the exception to the rule, but would be the example of what was possible for young black kids here in my city in Washington, D.C. Unfortunately, over my lifetime, this is still yet to be the case. As I stood there facing the graduation stage in 2016, I made a commitment that I was no longer going to be a passerby. I no longer was just going to read the news headlines and think that it is okay to just talk about the issues. And in that moment, I turned down opportunities to pursue Wall Street. I turned down opportunities to pursue development. I turned down opportunities to make money, to go back to my community to ensure that pathways were created so that every child that is born here in the nation's capital, had an opportunity to be successful. And in that time, here in Washington, D.C., as we headed into the summer of 2016, gun violence was at an all-time high. But through the efforts and the hard work of dozens and dozens of individuals and dozens of organizations, in Anacostia, where we first held our first program at Good Projects, in that summer in 2016, there were 0 gun-related incidences. 0. Now, why was that the case? Because what you saw in the summer of 2016 was a group of committed individuals that said we weren't just going to talk about the problems. We weren't just going to stand and say we're going to debate over them or stand in the halls of Congress and talk about why things can't happen or make excuses. City, but we were going to roll up our sleeves and put on our work boots and get in the community and do what needed to be done. From there, my journey continued. Through the investment here of the D.C. government, we expanded our efforts from one summer camp to running one of the largest juvenile justice programs, not just here in the district, but around the nation. The Credible Messenger Initiative has become a national model for restorative justice. But what I didn't know, what I was signing up for, the young, kind-hearted, ambitious, at that point, 21-year-old I didn't know the trauma and the despair that I was signing up for at that time, where over the next several years, going in and out of juvenile detention facilities here in the district, I found myself experiencing firsthand the effects of gun violence, losing dozens of students that I was working with to guns, either being the perpetrators or the victims of these heinous crimes. But it was in doing that work that I started to realize that the issue is much bigger than guns. The issue is much bigger than laws. The issue is the heart. We have young people that are growing up here in Washington, D.C. and around this country that are growing up completely hopeless, that are growing up without an ounce of love in their life, at no fault of their own, that by the time they hit 13, 14, 15 years old, they've already given up. And based on how we treat them as a whole in this country, I don't blame them. Too often I have found myself at the front row of funerals and sitting in people's living rooms trying to explain to them what has happened. Yet we sit here and we debate issues as if there are not real people on the other side of them. I personally can no longer stand for it. Unlike several members that fill these halls, unlike several leaders that lead organizations, I will leave the Senate building today and return to a community that is less than a mile away from the U.S. Capitol in which I stand, that is plagued by poverty, that is plagued by gun violence. Where is the Savior? Where is the help? We debate these things from our ivory towers in hope that they will just change on their own. But I can tell you from what I'm seeing firsthand on the ground, things will only get worse if we do not act now. I have chosen to pursue my passions in the community, not for myself, not for fame, not for notoriety, not for money, but because I have no choice. To know a problem exists and not to do anything about it makes you the perpetrator. I refuse to be on that side of history. I have chosen in 2022 to pursue the office of the U.S. Shadow Representative for Washington, D.C., not because I want to pursue a political office, but because I'm tired of business as usual. Now is the time for us to take action. I implore members of the D.C. community, I implore my fellow members of government here in the district to act. Because at what point, how many lives have to be lost before we decide that we are going to invest in our children? I thank you all for what you have already done, but at the end of the day, we must keep working. We cannot pride ourselves, and we've done so for too long, on the individual lives that we save. The time has come and gone for that. This is a systems-level issue. Guns are a symptom of a much larger problem that we have in our communities. Passing common sense gun safety legislation is a simple thing that we can all do to address a much larger issue. Today, I come to you as a humble servant of the people that I love in Southwest Washington, D.C., and I implore all of you to continue to stay in the good fight. My name is Darius Baxter. I'm the president and CEO of Good Projects, and I look forward to working with millions of people across America as we continue to address the issues of gun violence now and for years to come. Thank you.